I knew my son wanted me gone forever the moment I noticed my signature line had already been highlighted in yellow. My throat tightened, my palms went damp, and the room felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls themselves were listening. In that instant, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This was not an accident, this was not confusion, and this would end with consequences. If you have ever trusted family who smiled while quietly arranging your destruction, subscribe now so you do not miss how this ends. My name is Marjorie Bellamy, and at 70 years old, I believed I had finally earned peace. I lived alone in a pale blue colonial home at the edge of Ashford Hollow, Connecticut, where the trees leaned in close enough to feel like old friends. The house smelled of lemon polish, old paper, and faint traces of lavender from sachets I tucked into drawers years ago and never replaced. Mornings were predictable. Tea steeped too long, the radio murmuring news I half listened to, sunlight crawling slowly across the dining table, where I once graded nursing textbooks and later helped a small boy with spelling homework. I had worked as a registered nurse for 37 years. I had seen bodies fail, hearts stop, and families fracture in waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and grief. I had learned patience, restraint, and how to read people when they thought no one was watching. I raised one child alone, Calder Bellamy. His father died when Calder was 9, crushed beneath faulty scaffolding at a job site. I remember the knock at the door, the way the officer couldn't meet my eyes. The way Calder clutched my sweater and asked questions no child should ask. From that moment on, my life bent around my son. I worked nights, picked up extra shifts. I skipped vacations, new furniture, anything that wasn't necessary. I taught Calder independence, but I also taught him that I would always be there. And for years, I was. Calder grew into a well-groomed man with a careful smile and a voice that always sounded calm, even when it wasn't. He went to college, studied finance-adjacent things I never fully understood. He moved away, called on holidays, sent flowers on Mother's Day. A polite son. Then, a year ago, he started coming back. At first, I told myself it was concern. After all, 70 sounds older than it feels. My knees ached when it rained. My vision softened at night. But I cooked, drove, gardened, and paid my own bills. Still, Calder arrived with groceries I hadn't asked for. He fixed things that weren't broken. He lingered in doorways, eyes scanning shelves, drawers, corners. And something about the timing felt wrong. The first crack appeared at my cardiologist's office. Calder insisted on driving me, even though my car sat perfectly fine in the driveway. "It's easier this way," he said. Inside the clinic, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and burnt coffee. When the receptionist asked for my information, Calder answered before I could. "She forgets details sometimes," he said lightly, smiling as if this were charming. I laughed because women my age are trained to soften moments that bruise. But when the nurse handed him my chart instead of me, I felt something sharp flicker behind my ribs. That should have been my first warning. The second came at church. Ashford Hollow was the kind of town where church was less about God and more about being seen. After service, Calder introduced me to Lydia Parkhurst, a woman with impeccable posture and eyes that measured everything. "She's helping me streamline things," Calder said, resting his hand on my shoulder. "Mom's affairs can get complicated at this stage." At this stage. Lydia smiled at me the way professionals smile at liabilities. That should have been my second warning. The third came during a family luncheon at my sister's house. My niece laughed and said, "Well, Calder's basically in charge now." The room chuckled. I smiled. Inside, something whispered, "You are being spoken about in the past tense." Control rarely arrives loudly. It arrives dressed as assistance. Calder suggested online banking for safety. He reorganized my paperwork into folders I hadn't labeled. He corrected my memories in conversation. "No, Mom, that's not how it happened." When I protested, he sighed. Not angry, just disappointed, as if I were making things difficult. One evening, I stood in the hallway while he spoke on the phone in the kitchen. Yes, she's cooperative, very agreeable. The word cooperative settled into my bones like cold water. I should have said something then, but mothers are conditioned to doubt themselves before doubting their children. It was raining the day Calder brought the folder, a fine, persistent rain that tapped against the windows like it wanted inside. He placed a leather portfolio on my dining table, smoothing it with care. Just routine updates, he said. Medical insurance, estate alignment. He slid a pen toward me. I did not pick it up. Instead, I read. The language was heavy, intentionally exhausting, designed to make an older woman surrender out of fatigue. Then I reached the final page. Durable power of attorney. Executor authority effective immediately upon physician confirmation. Consent for relocation under medical advisement. My heart thudded so loudly I was certain he could hear it. What relocation? I asked. Calder smiled too fast. For your comfort. I noticed something tucked beneath the paperwork. A brochure, a luxury medical cruise. One way. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door. My reflection stared back at me, lined, gray-haired, but alert. I had spent decades watching people deteriorate under stress. I recognized manipulation when I saw it. That night, after Calder left, I called Harlan Wicks, a retired attorney whose wife I had nursed through hospice. He listened silently. Then he said, "Marjorie, this is not care planning. This is control." My hands shook, but beneath the fear, something steadied. Because Calder believed I was fading, what he didn't realize was that I had survived worse than him. That night, I slept poorly, but when morning came, fear was no longer in charge. Something else had taken its place. Purpose. The most useful thing Calder ever gave me was a role. He decided who I was without asking, and once he did, he stopped watching closely. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the living room, the house unusually loud with its own small noises, the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the wind nudging the windows like a persistent thought. I did not sleep. I did not cry. Instead, I reviewed every conversation from the past year, every interruption, every moment where my voice had been gently stepped over. I stripped memory of emotion and studied it the way I once studied charts at the hospital. Patterns emerged quickly. Calder never argued directly. He reframed. He softened. He reassured while redirecting. And he always spoke about me, never with me. By morning, the fear had settled into something far more useful. Focus. I called him just after 9. "I've been thinking," I said, letting my voice waver slightly. "You're right. I shouldn't be stubborn." There was a pause on the line, then relief. "Good," he said. "I just want what's best for you." I smiled to myself. So did I. From that moment on, I became exactly what Calder needed me to be. I thanked him excessively. I asked simple questions twice. I wrote reminders on sticky notes and forgot where I put them. When he corrected me, I apologized. When he spoke slowly, I waited patiently. Men like Calder mistake compliance for incapacity. They cannot imagine that a woman who agrees quietly might be collecting ammunition. He began to linger longer during visits. He spoke freely. Once, while standing in my kitchen, he said casually, "Once the transition's complete, things will be easier for everyone." "For everyone," I echoed. "Yes," he said. "Less stress." I noted the word transition. That night, I wrote it down. Harlan Wicks arrived on a gray Tuesday with a legal pad and a gravity that felt familiar. We sat at the dining table where Calder once spilled juice while doing homework. Sunlight fell across the wood in neat lines, as if dividing truth from illusion. "This is elder coercion," Harlan said, tapping the papers. "But courts don't run on feelings. They run on proof." We created a timeline, every visit, every document, every financial suggestion. Intent, Harlan said again. We need to show intent. That word stayed with me long after he left. Intent is what separates care from control. I began recording everything, not dramatically, not obviously. A phone resting face down on the table, a recorder tucked inside a knitting basket, notes written in careful, dated handwriting. Calder noticed nothing. In fact, he seemed more confident than ever. One afternoon, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, a lot of people your age don't have family willing to help like this." I looked up at him. "I'm lucky," I said. The lie tasted bitter and sweet at the same time. The auditor's name was Gideon Rourke. He had the calm demeanor of a man who had spent his career watching greed repeat itself in different outfits. He worked quietly. Within days, he found irregularities. A temporary holding account under Calder's business name, authorization requests timed carefully after my medical appointments, fees disguised as administrative restructuring. "They plan to make you financially dependent first," Gideon said, then legally silent. "And after that?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. That told me enough. Calder scheduled a neurological evaluation with Dr. Evan Whitlock, framing it as a precaution. What he didn't know was that I requested a private consultation beforehand. Dr. Whitlock was thorough, unflinching, respectful. At the end of the assessment, he folded his hands. "Mrs. B. Bellamy," he said, "you are cognitively intact, exceptionally so." He paused, then added, "If anyone claims otherwise, they are misrepresenting your condition." Calder's jaw tightened. Mine did not. For weeks, I leaned fully into the role Calder assigned me. I asked where I'd placed my glasses while wearing them. I pretended not to remember names. I let him repeat explanations slowly, patiently. It was exhausting, but it was effective, because confidence breeds carelessness. One evening, after a glass of wine, Calder said, "Once everything's finalized, the facility will handle most things." "Facility?" I asked. He froze, then smiled. "Just an option." I recorded that too. If you've ever been underestimated because of age, kindness, or silence, comment below and subscribe, because this story is only escalating. Lydia invited me to lunch. That was her mistake. She chose an upscale restaurant with mirrored walls and a waiter who hovered close enough to hear everything. She spoke about legacy planning, about generational efficiency, about how Calder was very proactive. "Proactive," I repeated. She nodded, smiling. "He's been preparing for this phase for a while." I let the silence stretch. People talk when silence makes them uncomfortable. She filled it eagerly. My neighbor, Rowan Hale, knocked one evening holding a misdelivered envelope. Inside was a receipt for a private care facility, reserved, paid, dated, 2 weeks away. I sat down slowly. Then I stood, because now the trap was complete. Calder believed the process was nearly finished. He believed I was confused, compliant, and grateful. What he did not understand was that I had spent my entire adult life watching people underestimate women who stayed quiet, and I had never seen it end well for them. The morning of my 70th birthday arrived with a bright sky and a treacherous kind of calm. The sun lay across my bedroom floor in a clean rectangle, warm as fresh bread, and for a moment I let myself imagine this day could be ordinary, that the worst thing I'd face would be candles and polite speeches, and someone insisting I take home extra slices of cake. But my body did not believe in ordinary anymore. My hands were steady as I dressed, yet my chest carried that quiet, coiled sensation I used to feel before a complicated surgery, when everyone in the room acted confident, but the air itself knew the stakes. I chose a dove-gray dress that fit cleanly at the shoulders and fell with dignity. Pearls at my throat, a soft rose lipstick, sensible heels, not a costume of youth, not an apology for age. In the mirror, I looked like a woman people would call sweet, and that nearly made me laugh. Sweetness had gotten me through decades of hard shifts and harder seasons, but today it was a blade I intended to keep hidden. Calder arrived at 10 sharp, as if punctuality could substitute for integrity. He stood on my porch wearing a navy blazer and that careful expression, tenderness, arranged in advance. "There she is," he said, as if he'd come to pick up a fragile heirloom. He kissed my cheek. I smelled mint and expensive cologne and the faint metallic tang of his car keys. He offered me his arm. I took it, light as a feather, because I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing my anger in my body. During the drive, he talked too much. That was one of his tells. When Calder was nervous, he filled the space. "We're going to have such a nice day," he said. "Everyone's excited. You deserve it." I watched the trees blur past. "I'm sure it will be memorable." He chuckled without understanding why my words were not a comfort. The fellowship hall beside our church sat like a quiet witness behind the main building. I'd attended potlucks there, committee meetings, holiday bazaars. It had served coffee that tasted like burnt regret and listened to years of gossip disguised as prayer requests. Today, it was transformed. White tablecloths draped the tables, gold-trimmed plates caught the light like stage props. Centerpieces of winter greenery and pale roses stood upright, proud and restrained. A projector screen was positioned near the front, and the cables were taped down with such neatness it looked like someone had planned for a performance. Calder loved performances. People clustered in small groups, laughing softly. The air smelled of vanilla, roasted chicken, and someone's perfume, powdery and stubborn. I recognized faces like pages from an old book. Delphine Mercer, my retired nurse friend with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue. Pastor Silas Crowell, who always spoke as if God were taking notes. My neighbor Rowan Hale, whose quiet presence made me feel safer than any lock on my door. There were relatives, too. Blood that shared my face in small ways, but not my loyalty. My sister Bernice Lawton was there, stiff-backed and opinionated, wearing a brooch that looked like it might cut someone if the conversation went poorly. My cousin Tamsin Reddick floated near the dessert table, like a woman who considered cake a social rite. A few others arrived with that hungry brightness people wear when they suspect a spectacle. Lydia Parkhurst arrived last, exactly as a woman like Lydia would. She glided in like she owned a share of the building. She wore a cream dress, pearl earrings, and a smile that was too controlled to be kind. "Marjorie," she said, touching my hand briefly. Her fingers were cool. "You look wonderful, very composed." "Thank you," I replied. "I feel unusually clear today." Her blink was so small it almost didn't happen. She smiled again anyway, because Lydia had likely trained herself to smile through disasters. Calder escorted me to a seat near the front, positioned perfectly for viewing, like an honored guest or a subject in a demonstration. He patted my shoulder. His hand was heavier than it needed to be. "Just relax," he whispered. "Enjoy." I looked up at him. "Oh, I will." He walked away, already collecting compliments. "You're such a devoted son," someone told him. Calder's smile turned modest, practiced. "I just want to make sure Mom's taken care of." That phrase, taken care of, it had become his favorite blanket. He used it to cover every sharp object. The program began with prayer. Pastor Silas stood at the podium, his voice deep and warm. "We gather to celebrate a life of service," he said, "and to honor the grace that comes with long years." He spoke about endurance and legacy and the kind of love that does not insist on its own way. I noted how easily Scripture could be bent into a weapon when the wrong hands held it. Then came lighthearted speeches. Delphine spoke next, and the room relaxed because Delphine always gave people what they needed, truth dressed in humor. "Marjorie saved my hide more times than I can count," she said. "And if she ever tells you she's tired, don't believe her. That woman could outlast a storm." The crowd laughed. I smiled, feeling the warmth of genuine affection. Then Cousin Tamsin took the microphone and made a joke about how I used to label every leftover container in the fridge like a pharmacist. That should have been my first clue she'd live forever, Tamsin said. More laughter. Calder waited until the laughter settled, then rose as if he'd been rehearsing his timing. He approached the podium with an easy stride, posture straight, shoulders squared like a man ready to accept applause. He began with warmth. "My mother," he said, "has given her whole life to others. Night shifts, holidays, sacrifices nobody sees." He paused and looked at me with a fondness so convincing it could have fooled strangers. It had fooled me for years. "Tonight," he continued, "is about honoring her legacy and ensuring her comfort and safety as she enters the next chapter." Next chapter. The phrase landed like a door closing behind me. He gestured toward the projector. The lights dimmed slightly. Photos appeared. Me holding baby Calder, my nurse uniform, a Christmas morning from decades ago. People made the soft sounds of nostalgia. I heard someone whisper, "Look at that," as if the past were a charming movie and not a battlefield. Calder narrated like a man presenting a tribute. The audience smiled and sighed at the appropriate places. Lydia watched with a satisfied stillness, as if she were already counting the outcome. Then Calder paused dramatically. "And now," he said, voice deepening, "a look at what comes next." That was my cue. I stood. It wasn't dramatic at first, just the sound of my chair legs against the floor. But the room changed instantly, the way water changes when a storm begins. Calder turned toward me, surprised. He blinked once, then smiled. "Mom," he said into the microphone, amused, "you want to add something?" "I do," I said, calm enough to frighten myself. He hesitated, then handed me the microphone as if granting permission. I walked to the podium slowly. I could feel eyes on my back, curious, warm, unsuspecting. "I'm grateful," I began, "for friends, for faith, for the years I've been given." Heads nodded. Calder relaxed again. His shoulders loosened. I saw it. The moment he decided I'd deliver a sentimental speech and sit back down. "But gratitude," I continued, "should never require silence." The room held its breath. People didn't know why yet, but they sensed the shift. I opened my purse and removed a plain folder. Not leather, not elegant, just paper. Ordinary, unremarkable, and lethal. "This," I said, holding it up, "is what my son asked me to sign." A ripple of confusion spread. Calder's smile stiffened. "Mom, that's—" "Please," I said gently, and my tone was so firm it surprised even me. "Let me finish." I nodded to the technician near the projector. He looked uncertain, then glanced at Delphine, who nodded sharply, and he obeyed. The screen changed. Documents filled the wall, clauses enlarged, dates highlighted. My name repeated like a target. A quiet gasp traveled through the crowd. "This document," I said, "was presented to me as a small update to medical insurance." I paused, letting the lie hang in the air. In truth, it would have transferred my finances, my medical decisions, and my legal authority to my son, effective immediately upon physician confirmation. Now the room reacted. Not laughter, not polite murmurs. Real shock. Someone whispered, "What?" Calder stepped forward, hands raised in that calm, controlling posture. "Mom is misunderstanding. This is—" The technician clicked. Audio filled the hall. Calder's voice, recorded clearly, confidently, rang out. "Once the transition's complete, things will be easier for everyone." Silence slammed down. It was physical. People froze as if the air had turned to glass. Bernice's mouth fell open. Delphine's eyes narrowed like a blade. Lydia's face tightened, her smile disappearing so quickly it looked yanked away. Calder stood still, his eyes darting from the screen to the crowd to me, searching for a place to plant control again. I lifted another page. "And this," I said, "was tucked into the folder." The projector displayed the brochure, a luxury medical cruise, one way, a care retreat. gentle waves, smiling seniors. A woman near the back covered her mouth. Rowan's jaw clenched. Calder's lips parted, but no words arrived on time. I was scheduled for relocation, I said, without my consent. Calder forced a laugh, thin, brittle. That's not relocation, it's a disappearance, Delphine muttered loudly enough for half the room to hear. A few people laughed nervously at Delphine's bluntness, then stopped when they realized it wasn't a joke. I kept my voice steady. I want to be clear. I am not confused. I am not incompetent. And I did not agree to be erased. That was the first climax, the room's collective understanding tipping from doubt into certainty. But Calder still tried. He took a step toward me, lowering his voice, trying to sound intimate. Mom, please, we can talk. He attempted to touch my elbow. I moved just enough to make the gesture miss. A small thing. But the crowd saw it. And in that moment, Calder lost the ability to frame himself as the devoted son. Dr. Evan Whitlock stood from his seat. As Mrs. Bellamy's neurologist, he said evenly, I can confirm she is fully competent, exceptionally so. He paused, letting it land. Any claim otherwise would be inaccurate. The room erupted into murmurs. People turned to each other, faces shifting. Sympathy for me, suspicion for Calder. Calder's face flushed. Doctor, that's not... Dr. Whitlock looked at him coolly. I will not participate in misrepresentation. That sentence struck like a gavel. Then came the twist Calder didn't see coming. The projector shifted again, not to Calder's voice, but to Lydia's, a recording from lunch, crisp and unmistakable. He's been preparing for this phase for a while, Lydia's voice said. The generational handoff is overdue. Lydia stood so fast her chair scraped. This is outrageous, she snapped. This is illegal. Delphine called out sweetly, so is stealing from the elderly, honey. That, of all things, broke the tension for a half second. A few startled laughs escaped. Even in the middle of ruin, humor has a way of slipping through, like light under a door. Calder pointed at the screen. This is manipulation. She's being influenced. I leaned into the microphone. By whom, Calder? By the truth. Then Harlan Wicks entered through the side door with 2 uniformed officers behind him. The room turned as one body. The first officer, tall and broad-shouldered, spoke calmly. His name badge read Colton Avery. Calder Bellamy, he said. We need to speak with you regarding allegations of elder coercion and financial misconduct. A second officer stood slightly behind him, Mason Ridley, eyes alert, posture watchful. Calder's confidence collapsed in real time. His eyes widened the way a man's do when he realizes charm will not save him. Mom, he said, voice cracking, tell them this isn't... I looked at him and felt something strange. Not hatred, disappointment. The kind that settles deep and stays. You underestimated me, I said softly into the microphone for everyone to hear, and you forgot who taught you to survive. Calder tried to step toward me again, but Officer Avery shifted smoothly, blocking him. Lydia backed away, mouth tight, scanning exits like a woman calculating how quickly she could become someone else. Pastor Silas stood frozen, hands half raised as if unsure whether to pray or intervene. Bernice stared at Calder as if seeing him for the first time. The officers guided Calder toward the exit. He resisted just enough to look wrong, his composure frayed. This is a misunderstanding, he called to the room. She's being dramatic, Delphine called back. You should have chosen a quieter victim. People gasped again, half scandalized, half relieved someone had said it. Calder's eyes found mine one last time, and for a moment there was something childlike in his expression, panic, pleading, disbelief. For the briefest second, my mother's heart trembled. Then I remembered the yellow highlight over my signature line, and my voice stayed steady. The second climax hit when the officer said, loud enough for everyone to hear, Sir, if you continue resisting, you will be detained. Detained. The word turned Calder's fantasy of control into a public reality. He went pale. His mouth opened. Then he allowed himself to be escorted out. The doors closed behind him. The hall remained silent, stunned by the sudden absence of the man who'd filled it with his performance. I returned to my seat slowly, every step measured, my knees surprisingly steady. The room watched me differently now, not as an aging woman being honored, but as a woman who had fought back. Delphine leaned close and whispered, "Well, that's one way to cut the cake." I let out a small laugh, soft, tired, real. Outside, through the tall windows, I saw Calder in the parking lot between the officers, his shoulders hunched. For the first time in a long time, he looked exactly like what he was. Not powerful, just caught. If this reveal shook you, subscribe and comment below, because the aftermath is where the real justice begins. The morning after my 70th birthday arrived without music, without witnesses, and without Calder's polished voice narrating my life. I woke before dawn, the way nurses do even after retirement, and lay still while the house settled around me. Pipes clicked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a crow argued with the wind. The quiet felt heavier than sleep, like the air had been holding its breath for months and was only now letting go. I sat up slowly and placed my feet on the cool floorboards. For a moment, I stared at my hands, half expecting them to tremble the way they had when I first saw that yellow highlight over my signature line. But they were steady. Not because I felt brave, but because something in me had finally stopped pleading for permission. I made tea and did not drink it. I watched the steam curl and vanish. It reminded me of the way denial rises, then disappears, leaving only the truth behind. I thought of the fellowship hall. The projector glow, the stunned faces, and Calder's expression when authority stepped between him and his story. Victory does not always feel like celebration. Sometimes it feels like a bruise you are grateful to have because it proves you survived. Harlan Wicks phoned at precisely 9. He sounded tired but satisfied, the way he used to sound when he won an argument without raising his voice. "They froze the accounts," he said. "Every account connected to Calder's business entity and anything he touched under your name. The bank's compliance team moved fast once the recordings were logged." I closed my eyes and let the words settle. Frozen accounts. It sounded like winter, but it was spring cleaning. "And the care facility?" I asked. "Canceled," Harlan replied. "The contract is void. They don't want exposure. Also, a temporary restraining order is being drafted. He's been advised not to contact you." "Advised," I repeated. Harlan gave a quiet chuckle. He's the type who hears advice as an insult, but lawyers are not impressed by pride. When I ended the call, I sat at the table and listened to the silence again. It was still heavy, but now it had edges, shape, meaning. The house was mine again, not a stage for a son rehearsing my disappearance. By mid-morning, the first casseroles arrived. Ashford Hollow has a peculiar way of handling scandal. It feeds you while it digests the story. A foil pan of baked ziti appeared on my porch, still warm. Then a container of lemon bars. Then a basket of rolls wrapped in a dish towel embroidered with little blue flowers. The phone rang on and off all day. Some people called because they cared. Others called because they needed to clean their conscience. "Marjorie, I had no idea," one woman said, voice cracking. "He seemed so devoted." "He practiced devotion," I replied gently. "Some people practice it like a speech." Another caller whispered, "Are you safe?" I looked at my locked front door, the sunlight on my curtains, the steadiness in my own chest. "I am now," I said. "That's the difference." Delphine Mercer arrived in person, brisk and unapologetic, carrying a bouquet she'd stolen from her own dining table. "Well," she announced, dropping into my armchair, "you certainly made the church hall memorable." I laughed softly, then surprised myself by laughing again. "It wasn't my original plan," I said. Delphine lifted an eyebrow. That's what makes it art. Calder called once that afternoon. I watched the phone ring without moving. I did not enjoy ignoring him. I simply refused to reopen a door he had used as a weapon. Later, Harlan told me Calder retained an attorney with a reputation for smoothing storms into polite weather. The attorney's strategy was predictable. First deny, then soften, then claim misunderstanding. Finally, blame stress. None of it survived paper. Calder's emails were precise, timed, and too careful. His signatures, his instructions, his neat requests for evaluation and streamlining read like a blueprint when viewed together. And the recordings, played in a quiet office without church music underneath, sounded worse than they did in my kitchen. Harlan relayed one sentence Calder apparently muttered during a meeting. "She's making me look like a monster." Not I hurt her. Not I crossed a line. Only, "She is ruining my reflection." "That tells you everything," Delphine said when I repeated it. It did. It told me that Calder's greatest grief was not my pain, but his inconvenience. Lydia Parkhurst resigned within the week. Her firm released a statement about internal review and professional standards. The language was clean, but the meaning was sharp. They were cutting the rope before it tightened around them. I ran into Lydia at the grocery store 2 days later. She stood in the frozen aisle staring at a row of meals she didn't seem to see. Her hair was flawless, but her posture had collapsed by an inch, the smallest sign of stress. When she noticed me, her eyes flicked away as if my presence carried a charge. She opened her mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to negotiate. I said nothing, not out of cruelty, out of completion. She had already spoken enough. Her own voice had been the evidence. She turned her cart and walked away quickly. I watched her go and felt no satisfaction, only a quiet clarity. Not every consequence arrives with fireworks. Some arrive with doors closing and phones going silent. Recovery did not arrive as a single triumphant scene. It arrived through small administrative acts that, taken together, rebuilt my authority. Gideon Rourke, the auditor, came by my house twice with a laptop and the patience of a man who has watched greed repeat itself in different outfits. "We'll change everything," he said. "Passwords, authorizations, beneficiaries. We'll restore what's clean and flag what's contaminated." Contaminated. A clinical word for a dirty intention. We spent hours on calls. I answered security questions that suddenly felt like vows. What was your first pet's name? What street did you grow up on? What was your first job? Each answer was a reminder that my history belonged to me, not to anyone who wanted to convert it into leverage. I replaced my locks, not because I believed Calder would break in, but because the old keys had been held by the wrong hand. I canceled the subscriptions he'd signed me up for without asking. I returned the filing cabinet to my own system, the one that made sense to me, not to someone trying to make my life look disorganized. In the hallway where I once overheard him call me cooperative, I stopped and stood still. Cooperation is voluntary, I told myself. It is not something you steal. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courthouse waiting room with chairs that squeaked when you shifted. The air smelled like old carpet, stale coffee, and a kind of human worry that has no perfume. Harlan sat beside me, calm as ever. Delphine insisted on coming and sat on my other side like a guard dog in pearls. Rowan Hale waited behind us, quiet and steady, a neighbor who had become a witness. Calder entered with his attorney. He looked smaller than I remembered, his blazer suddenly too sharp for his face. His eyes scanned the room and landed on me. For a moment, his expression softened in a way that might have once moved me. Then the judge walked in and everyone rose, and that softness vanished. Calder's spine straightened. He became the performance again. The hearing was not theatrical. It was precise. The judge reviewed evidence. Harlan spoke. The recordings were referenced. The documents were described in plain language that made them sound even uglier. When the judge asked Calder why he framed these changes as a minor medical update, Calder's attorney tried to answer for him. The judge held up a hand. "I asked him," she said. Calder cleared his throat. "I was trying to help my mother transition," he began. The judge's expression did not change. "Transition into what, Mr. Bellamy?" Calder paused. The room waited. He searched for a phrase that sounded kind. Finally, he said, "A safer arrangement." The judge nodded once. "For whom?" That question, so simple, cracked something in him. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked away. He had no answer that didn't reveal the truth. The judge issued orders: protective restrictions, account controls, and a referral for further investigation into financial misconduct. It was not a final ending, but it was a public line, drawn in ink. When we left the courtroom, Delphine leaned close and whispered, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." I smiled. "It's the gift that keeps on giving," I replied, and even Harlan laughed. Ashford Hollow is small enough that news travels on the same roads as school buses and grocery trucks. Within days, Calder's name carried a weight it never had before. He lost invitations. He lost friendly smiles. He lost the soft social shields that men like him depend on. Gideon called me one afternoon and said, almost casually, he tried to open a new account at another bank branch. "And?" I asked. "Denied," Gideon replied. "Flagged. The system remembers." I laughed then, not because I enjoyed his struggle, but because it proved something important. Consequences can be quiet and relentless, like water wearing down stone. Bernice phoned me after church one Sunday. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said. "How he spoke over you, how we let him." "We did," I agreed. There was a pause, then her voice softened. "I'm sorry." It wasn't absolution. It was acknowledgement. Sometimes that is the first honest brick in rebuilding family. One night, sleepless, I wrote Calder a letter. I wrote about his father's death, about the boy who clung to me, about the man who learned to speak with charm while thinking with hunger. I wrote what I never said out loud, that I would have helped him, truly helped him, if he had asked, if he had been honest, if he had treated me as a person instead of a problem. I wrote that he had mistaken my kindness for weakness and my silence for surrender. Then I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not to punish him, to protect myself. I did not want a response. I did not want another negotiation. Some doors once shut should remain shut. Spring arrived slowly that year. The maples budded. The air softened. The world behaved as if nothing had happened, and that, strangely, was healing. I planted rosemary and thyme in the garden. I invited Delphine over for dinner and let her critique my seasoning like a judge on a harmless panel. I took long walks without checking my phone. I sat on my porch in the evenings with a book and the sound of crickets warming up the night. I traveled to the coast alone, not to prove anything, but because I wanted to. I ate clam chowder at a small cafe and watched waves roll in and out with patient certainty. The ocean does not explain itself. It just continues. Back home, I reorganized my life in small, satisfying ways. I donated old clothes. I gave away a chair Calder once insisted I should replace. I kept the things that felt like me. Freedom, I learned, is not loud. It is the steady absence of fear. Betrayal does not always arrive with a knife. Sometimes it arrives with a folder, a smile, and the word just. Just a small update. Just sign here. Just for your protection. But here is what Calder never understood, and what I want every woman listening to understand. Age does not erase your worth. It reveals your history. Kindness does not cancel your rights. It tests other people's character. And silence is not the same as ignorance. Sometimes silence is a woman measuring the room, gathering strength, and deciding whether mercy is deserved. I did not lose my son that day. I lost the illusion of who he was, and I gained the truth of who I am. A month after the hearing, Calder tried one final approach. Not a call from his own number, of course. He sent a message through Bernice, wrapped in the language of remorse and family duty. She asked if I would meet him at a public cafe for closure. I agreed, not because I owed him comfort, but because I wanted to see whether he understood what he had done. I chose the cafe near the town green, bright and busy, with windows wide enough for witnesses. I arrived early and sat where I could see the door. Calder walked in looking carefully prepared, neat hair, softened expression, hands empty, as if emptiness could prove innocence. "Mom," he said, sitting across from me, "I'm glad you came." "I didn't come for gladness," I replied. He swallowed and tried again. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was under pressure. I thought I was doing the responsible thing." "The responsible thing would have been honesty," I said. He leaned forward. "I can fix this. We can move forward." I nodded toward the counter. "Order something," I said. "You always talk better with a full mouth." He blinked, then obeyed, returning with coffee cradled like a prop. He began another speech about family, forgiveness, and second chances. I let him finish. When he stopped, I said softly, "Calder, you did not make a mistake. You made a plan." His eyes hardened. "So you're never going to forgive me?" "I forgave you the moment I stopped needing you to be different," I said. "Forgiveness is not access." Anger flashed behind his composure, the same anger he once disguised as care. That was my answer. I stood, smoothed my dress, and said, "If you ever try to manage me again, you will meet the same wall, only higher." Outside, the air smelled of bread and cut grass, and I felt lighter, as if my spine finally belonged to me. Then I walked out into the sunlight, and my steps did not hurry. Tell me in the comments, have you ever chosen dignity over family, and what did it cost you? Thank you so much for listening. I will see you in our next story.